And you can see more and more coming out, like robotics. You can see robots that can learn to walk from nothing, within hours, like way faster than any biological being. The thing that's most dangerous is, and it's the hardest to kind of wrap, kind of get your arms around because it's not a physical thing, is kind of a deep intelligence in the network. You say, well, what harm could a deep intelligence in the network do? So, well, it could start a war by doing fake news and spoofing email accounts and fake press releases, and just by manipulating information. The pen is mightier than the sword. As an example, I want to emphasize, I do not think this actually occurred. This is purely a hypothetical. But there was that second Malaysian airliner that was shot down on the Ukrainian-Russian border. And that really amplified tensions between Russia and the EU in a massive way. Well, let's say if you had an AI that was where the AI's goal was to maximize the value of a portfolio of stocks. One of the ways to maximize value would be to go long on defense, short on consumer, start a war. Then how could it do that? Well, hack into the Malaysian Airlines aircraft routing server, route it over a war zone, then send an anonymous tip that an enemy aircraft is flying overhead right now.
The on-ramp to serious AI, the danger is going to be more humans using it against each other, I think, most likely. That'll be the danger. Yeah.
How far do you think we are from something that can make its own mind up, whether or not something's ethically or morally correct, or whether or not it wants to do something, or whether or not it wants to improve itself, or whether or not it wants to protect itself from people or from other AI? How far away are we from something that's really, truly sentient?
Well, I mean, you could argue that any group of people, like a company is essentially a cybernetic collective of people and machines. That's what a company is. There's different levels of complexity in the way these companies are formed. And then there's sort of like a collective AI in the Google search, where we're all sort of plugged in as like nodes on the network, like leaves on a big tree. And we're all feeding this network with our questions and answers. We're all collectively programming the AI, and and Google plus all the humans that connect to it are one giant cybernetic collective. This is also true of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all these social networks. They're giant cybernetic collectives.
Humans and electronics all interfacing, and constantly connected.
Yes, constantly.
No, I mean, I do think that there's a potential path here, which is, and we're really getting into science fiction or sort of advanced science stuff, but having some sort of merger with biological intelligence and machine intelligence. To some degree, we are already a cyborg. You think of like the digital tools that you have, your phone, your computer, the applications that you have, like the fact that, as I was mentioning earlier, you can ask a question and instantly get an answer from Google or from other things, and so you already have a digital tertiary layer. I say tertiary because you can think of the limbic system, kind of the animal brain or the primal brain, and then the cortex, kind of the thinking, planning part of the brain, and then your digital self as a third layer. So you already have that, and it's like if somebody dies, their digital ghost is still around. All of their emails and the pictures that they posted and the social media, that still lives, even if they died. So over time, I think we'll probably see
a closer merger of biological intelligence and digital intelligence. And it's mostly about the bandwidth, the speed of the connection between your brain and the digital extension of yourself. Particularly output. And output, if anything, is getting worse. We used to have keyboards that we'd use a lot. Now we do most of our input through our thumbs on a phone. And that's just very slow. A computer can communicate at 1 trillion bits per second, but your thumb can maybe do, 10 bits per second or 100 if you're being generous. So some high bandwidth interface to the brain, I think, will be something that helps achieve a symbiosis between human and machine intelligence, and maybe solves the control problem and the usefulness problem. And the intent with OpenAI is to democratize AI power. There's a quote that I love from Lord Acton. He was the guy that came up with power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, which is that freedom consists of the distribution of power and despotism in its concentration. And so I think it's important, if we have this incredible power of AI, that it not be concentrated in the hands of a few and potentially lead to a world that we don't want.
And what world is that? What do you foresee that when you see it?
It's difficult. It's called the singularity because it's difficult to predict exactly what future that might be. Except I don't know a lot of people who love the idea of living under a despot. I don't think people generally choose to live in a democracy over a dictatorship.
And the despot would be the computer?
Or the people controlling the computer.
But if we take it that it's inevitable at this point, that some version of AI is coming down the line, how do we steer through that?
Well, I'm not normally an advocate of regulation and oversight. I think one should generally err on the side of minimizing those things. But this is a case where you have a very serious danger to the public. And therefore there needs to be a public body that has insight and then oversight to confirm that everyone is developing AI safely. This is extremely important. I think the danger of AI is much greater than the danger of nuclear warheads by a lot. And nobody would suggest that we allow anyone to just build nuclear warheads if they want. That would be insane. And mark my words, AI is far more dangerous than nukes. Far. So why do we have no regulatory oversight? This is insane.
One of the roles of government is to ensure the public good, and to that dangers to the public are addressed. So that hence the regulatory thing. I think the first order of business would be to try to learn as much as possible. To understand the nature of the issues, to look closely at the progress that is being made, and the remarkable achievements of artificial intelligence.
I made this comment some years ago, but it feels like we are the biological bootloader for AI, effectively. We are building it. And then we're building progressively greater intelligence. And the percentage of intelligence that is not human is increasing. And eventually, we will represent a very small percentage of intelligence.
I'm not really all that worried about the short-term stuff. Things that are, narrow AI is not a species-level risk. It will result in dislocation, in lost jobs, and sort of better weaponry and that kind of thing. But it is not a fundamental species-level risk, whereas digital superintelligence is. So it's really all about laying the groundwork to make sure that if humanity collectively decides that creating digital superintelligence is the right move, then we should do so very, very carefully. This is the most important thing that we could possibly do.
But the thing that's most dangerous is, and it's the hardest to kind of wrap kind of get your arms around, because it's not a physical thing, is kind of a deep intelligence in the network. And you say, well, what harm could a deep intelligence in the network do? So, well, it could start a war by doing fake news and spoofing email accounts and fake press releases, just by manipulating information. The pen is mightier than the sword. If you had an AI that was where the AI's goal was to maximize the value of a portfolio of stocks, one of the ways to maximize value would be to go long on defense, short on consumer, start a war. Then how could it do that? Well, hack into the Malaysian Airlines aircraft routing server, route it over a war zone, then send an anonymous tip that an enemy aircraft is flying overhead right now.
I try to convince people to slow down AI, to regulate AI. This was futile. I tried for years. Nobody listened.
No one. Are people more inclined to listen today? It seems like an issue that's brought up more often over the last few years than it was maybe 5-10 years ago. It seemed like science fiction.
Maybe they will. So far they haven't. I think people don't, normally the way that regulations work is very slow. This time frame is not relevant to AI. You can't take 10 years from the point at which it's dangerous. It's too late. It could be terrible, and it could be great. It's not clear.
Right.
But one thing is for sure, we will not control it.
AI risk is that I guess it's the sort of a benign AI, and that we're able to achieve a symbiosis with that AI. Ideally, the AI. There's somebody who, I can't remember his name, but had a good suggestion for what the optimization of the AI should be. What's its utility function? The AI should try to maximize the freedom of action of humanity. Maximize freedom, essentially. But we do want a close coupling between collective human intelligence and digital intelligence. Neuralink is trying to help in that regard by creating an interface between a high bandwidth interface between AI and human brain. We're already a cyborg in the sense that your phone and your computer are kind of an extension of you.
Just low bandwidth input output.
Exactly, it's just low bandwidth, particularly output. I mean, 2 thumbs basically.
I think the first order of business would be to gain insight. Right now, the government does not even have insight, and I think the right order of business would be to stand up a regulatory agency, initial goal, gain insight into the status of AI activity, make sure the situation is understood. Once it is, then put regulations in place to ensure public safety.
Do you think that it's likely that we will merge somehow or another with this sort of technology and it'll augment what we are now? Or do you think it will replace us?
Well, that's the scenario. The merge scenario with AI is the one that seems like probably the best.
For us.
Yes. If you can't beat it, join it. From a long-term existential standpoint, that's the purpose of Neuralink, is to create a high bandwidth interface to the brain such that we can be symbiotic with AI. Because we have a bandwidth problem. You just can't communicate through your fingers, it's too slow.
And where's Neuralink at right now?
I think we'll have something interesting to announce in a few months. That's at least an order of magnitude better than anything else. I think better than probably anyone thinks is possible.
How much can you talk about that right now?
I don't want to jump the gun on that.
But what's the ultimate, what's the idea behind it? What are you trying to accomplish with it? What would you like, best case scenario?
I think best case scenario, we effectively merge with AI, where AI serves as a tertiary cognition layer, where we've got the limbic system, kind of the primitive brain essentially. We've got the cortex. So you're currently in a symbiotic relationship. Your cortex and limbic system are in a symbiotic relationship.